Previous lecture. Money equals makes you self-reliant or less willing to help. If a woman approach to a man, she will act the same way as men does, in respect to their internal feelings and external behaviors. Today. Your mind is what your brain does. Mrs. O.C., 88-year-old woman. She started to hear songs within her head. Due to temporal lobe seizures, involved in hearing. Specifically, a right temporal lobe infarction. For most people the right hemisphere is in charge of music. When neurons fire in organized patterns, those are memories, physical actions, thoughts, etc. In epilepsy, neurons are firing for no good reason, but the neurons will drive certain mental processes that they normally support. In this case, the neurons that are firing, are involved in memory and songs. And when they fire, it's as if you heard the song itself. Because when you hear a song, you're never hearing the song, you're always hearing what your neurons are interpreting the sound that comes to your ear. So, if you have an injury in that part of the brain, you'll be cortically deaf, and never hear a sound, even though all the information came through your ear. And even more amazing. She declined taking anticonvulsive medication, because she felt it was a portal to her past. In opposite. Mrs. O.M., in her 80s. She also hears songs. But also hears ringing and hissing. She had this phenomenon for 4 years, without telling it so anybody. And she hears just 3 songs. Then. They give her anticonvulsive medications, that stops the seizures, and the songs. You have independent parts of your mind supported by independent part of your brain, and at any one moment, your consciousness might be in one part, and then it might move to another. Where different parts of your brain turn on, and that's when your consciousness is moving from one part of your brain to the other, but the other parts keep doing their things. Everything in us evolved from other species. Triune brain model. Reptilian-limbic system-neo-mammalian. Cells in the brain are called glia, support cells, and neurons. Neurons have a soma equals cell body equals gray matter. Axon equals if it's covered with myelin, it makes white matter. Output. Dendrite equals extensions of the neurons, input. Neurons communicate to neurotransmitters, across synapses, junctions between different parts of neurons. Collection of cell bodies equals nucleus. Collection of axons equals tract. Your brain has about 100 billion neurons. Minus 100 trillion synapses. Minus 62,000 miles of myelinated axons. Minus 100,000 miles of dendrites. An average neuron has 15,000 connections per cell. Average neuron has 1,000 synapses. Average axon has synapses on 1,000 neurons. Each of the 100 million neurons have the capacity of a medium-sized computer, computes about 1,000 multiplications and additions every 10 millisecond. Time for information to go from one neuron to another is about 10 millisecond. The cellular organization of the cerebellum is so consistent, that half of all the cortical neurons in the brain are in the cerebellum. It's involved in motor control, but we don't know a lot of it. Basal ganglia. Involved in movement. Learning habits. Reward system. Parkinson's and Huntington's, affects the basal ganglia. Limbic system. Involved in emotions. Memory. Related to the amygdala and hippocampus. And if you don't have this part intact, you can't form new memories ever again. Bigger cortices are good. Your smarts are in your cortices, like language, higher level thought, social development, etc. And people speculate that the way the brain is because you need to have a lot of neocortices in the smaller volume possible to be able to get through the birth canal. The cellular organization of the brain reflects in some way what that part of the brain is accomplishing. Gall and Spergsim discovered the pyramidal tracts. The ones that move from your motor cortex. Your left side of your brain control while your right hand, and your right side control your left hand. Broca's area is involved in language. Orbital frontal cortex. It sits right above your eyes. Phineas Cage case. He was a clever man, hard worker, conscious, etc. One day, an iron rod went through his head, due to a miscommunication during work. He survived and came back to work pretty soon. But now he was abusive, irresponsible, lazy, etc. Paul Broca. A patient who lost his speech, but he understood everything they say to him. Another patient. L.E. Bourne. Could only say 10 and swear like crazy. We think swearing is like an animal cry by the basal ganglia. Later they found he had an injury in his left frontal cortex. Which it's now called Broca's aphasia, which is the inability to speak despite your mouth can move, and you can understand language. What a test. Given to patients going through neurosurgery for epilepsy or tumors. To know which is your speak hemisphere. Because they want to know how much tissue they can take away if they're not near your language area. Then They inject into your femoral or carotid artery a drug called sodium amytal, which shuts down the operation of one hemisphere. And they see if you can talk. 2 days later they do the same in the other hemisphere. So now they know which side of your brain is the one that does the speaking. And now we know that 90 to 99% of people speak from their left hemisphere. About 80% of left-handed also speak from the left hemisphere. Corpus callosum. 200 million myelinated fibers that connect the similar areas from the left side and the right side, which is the white matter area. Everything that's in the right visual field starts in your brain in the left hemisphere. Everything that's in the left visual field starts in your brain in the right hemisphere. Opposite hemisphere seeing the opposite field, controlling the opposite hand. People who have separated corpus callosum. It's like they had two minds in one head. If show them a spoon and a cup on each field, and you ask him what did you see? And he will tell you, a cup. Because the information in the right visual field goes into the left hemisphere, that's the speaking hemisphere. So left hemisphere says, I saw a cup. But the right hemisphere saw this perfectly well, but because it's not the speaking hemisphere, the information is locked in the right hemisphere, so he can't say what he saw on that side. Also, each hemisphere only knows what it knows. But it's completely ignorant that the other one knows anything. Then, show him a square in the left visual field, and a triangle in the right visual field. And ask him, what did you see? And then asking to draw what he saw behind a board. He will tell you, I saw a triangle, because it's in the right field, it goes into their visual area in the left hemisphere, that's the speaking hemisphere. But if he's drawing with his left hand, he will draw the square, because the right hemisphere saw a square, so the left hand is drawing the square. And the patient is not bothered in the least, and don't even realize about it. Left hemisphere choose items by function. Right hemisphere pick items by appearance. People are desperate rationalizers for ourselves. When things are contradictory, we don't say, oh, things are contradictory. We say, well, here's why, as we explain our own behavior. The left hemisphere is seeing the parts. The right hemisphere is seeing the whole. Your brain is a society of semi-independent brains doing their own thing, sharing information as needed. And the more we study the brain, the more we understand how many parts of you there are that are semi-independent and autonomous.